We're really happy that you're joining us tonight. My name is Carolyn McDougall, and I work at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital. I'll be introducing the other presenters with me shortly. We're just going to be letting people join for a minute or so that they get their link active. So again, for those that have just joined, welcome. This is our session really focused for parents, supporting their teen and young adults to prepare for post-secondary education. Again, my name is Carolyn McDougall. I work at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital, and we're co-hosting tonight with the Toronto Catholic District School Board, Kate Wiley, and guest presenters from Centennial College, Robert Huterbisi, and from York University, Angela Lecomte. And we also have Lisa, a parent and family as faculty with Holland Bloorview. Lisa and Angela and Robert will be sharing their experiences with you. We're so happy that you've joined us as well. So we will get started. We do hope that by joining us tonight, at the end you will have some interesting things that you heard that you can talk about with your young person and family, and maybe have a strategy or a resource that you want to look into further. We'll spend about 40 or 45 minutes with the presentation and have 10, 15 minutes for questions at the end. Thanks. Next slide. So as we're getting going, we wanted to do a little check-in. We'd ask you if you'd like to, in the chat, to answer this question. One feeling I have about transition and life after high school is, how are you feeling at this stage? What are some of the feelings that brought you to today's webinar? See some words starting to pop in: anxious and apprehensive. People have questions. What supports will be at college? Feeling of worried, uncertain of supports. There are, it's definitely common, these, and so many, what a spectrum of emotions and feelings and concerns and questions. And it's great to be investigating and going to things like this, to have a chance to ask questions and talk to others and reach out and feel less alone. We did want to really emphasize that it's really very normal to have all sorts of types of different feelings at the same time. So we saw in the chat someone also typed excited. It is a time of great hope, and then also and concern, and that's really natural. It's just a big life change, and there's other life changes you've already been through, and there will be more too. And these are all good feelings that are leading you to investigate and to look in. And we hope these we'll be able to share some resources tonight that will be helpful. Thank you for participating in that. All right, next slide. I'm turning to Kate to share some resources up front. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Carolyn. So I'm just going to go through a few resources that are going to be shared with you, so don't worry about having to write them all down. The first few resources I'm going to share is that there's a number of programs available for your young adult if they are concerned about leaving secondary school too early. They're considering maybe doing a 5th year, or just want to do something with their 4th year to make sure that they're ready to go to college or university. And so 2 of them I've highlighted here are the dual credit program. And this is a program where students can still be tied to their high school, but they can go to a college to earn a college credit so that they have 1 credit in advance of going to college. Another program is the school within a college, where they're tied to a high school teacher in the college setting environment. If you're interested in either of these programs, the best person to talk to is your son or daughter's guidance counselor. In addition to this, all post-secondary universities and colleges have transition programs, and you can find them on the transition resource guide, which is the next slide. So this is just a screen capture of the Transition Resource Guide for students with disabilities. This is a very helpful website and a good place to start if you're at the beginning of your journey, because you can find links to every university and college in Ontario, and it will give you a link directly to their accessibility services. So that's very helpful, as well as it has lots of great information about transitions and understanding how to use accessibility services. And this is a list of resources that we'll reference throughout this presentation. We will email it, and I believe it's in the chat as well, so don't worry about having to copy down the resources, but this will be really helpful for your reference after the presentation.
Thanks, Kate. That's great. And so we're moving on to the section where Angela and Robert and Lisa will share some of their experiences.
Hi. So I work in accessibility services, and when I was putting this slide together, I was trying to think about parents when they come into my office for the first time, or when I talk to parents on the phone, and the common concerns that I often hear from parents, understandably, as your student is going through this huge change, right, into adulthood and into post-secondary. So quite often I hear families, they're concerned the student might fail, they may struggle with their courses, not know what to do, something's going to happen, they're going to fail a test and not know what to do next, or, they won't know who to go to, or that they don't have the self-advocacy skills or the time management skills, the independence needed to really succeed in post-secondary. So, and Robert, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, similarly to Angela, I'm working with students in an accessibility office, and continuing on from some of those common concerns and worries that students and their parents and advocates come forward with are often around accommodation, the nature of accommodations, the types of supports that are available at college and university, and what's required to access those supports. And so maybe I'd like to offer at these types of presentations, if there's one message you can take away from this evening, it's that your student will be supported at college or university. To point number 5, it may not look exactly like it does in high school, but something like formal documentation or out-of-date documentation won't be a barrier to accessing supports at college or university. And so I hope by the end of this evening, you'll have a little bit more information about what to consider and when to consider it. But I hope that right off the top, if we can communicate that accommodations exist and colleges and universities have a duty to accommodate, regardless of the status of documentation, that might quell a few concerns that are out there right now. I'll pass it on to Lisa for our next slide to talk a little bit about this from her perspective as a parent.
Yeah, so I'm here today to talk to you about my lived experience as a parent of a son with a disability and what it was like for me to help him navigate the transition from high school to university. So I have a single story, and yours might look very different from mine, but if there's one thing I've learned when speaking with other parents who have a disabled child, is that we share a lot of the same concerns, fears, and worries. So even if our situations are totally different, hopefully some of what I say tonight will resonate with you. So my husband and I, we have 3 children. My son has both an older and a younger sister. And when he was 14 and in grade 10, he suffered a pediatric ischemic stroke during an endurance test in gym class. And so in the many months that followed, he was at Sick Kids and then an inpatient at Holland Bloorview, where he worked towards his recovery, eventually becoming an inpatient. And he missed most of his grade 10 year, but thankfully was able to make use of the school at Holland Bloorview and stay on track with at least some of his courses. So while he made incredible gains in rehab, some physical and cognitive issues remain as a result of his acquired brain injury. Now he's 21 and he attends Queen's University, and he studies engineering physics with an option in computing. We live in Toronto, so we sent him away to school, which was extremely stressful for me. There were a number of things that we did in grade 11 and 12 to help him and us get ready, and it was a very gradual process. So I wanted to share these things with you. First of all, in terms of academics, I started to pull back as much as I could, because he was still deep in his recovery at that point, to let him take charge of his own studies. So I stopped asking him if he had homework. I gave him privacy over his grades, knowing that I would see them anyways once the report cards came, and I would get all the information anyways. One tip that I should just share with you here is that when it comes to university, your child needs to give permission for you to be able to see their grades. I didn't get my son to authorize this, but every child is different. For mine, it helped him to separate from us and develop autonomy. So when it came to social things in high school, I encouraged him to go places with his friends, get there on his own using the TTC, which had its own set of challenges. I let him stay out later, and I tried not to be so nosy. That was hard. This really helped him feel more autonomous, and it helped me gradually get used to not having as much control over these things. For me, it was better to withdraw slowly now or then than to have it all forced on me once he began post-secondary. When it came to life skills, because he entered the throes of teenagehood at the exact same time that he became very sick, there were a bunch of things that became less of a priority in raising him. So things like laundry, cooking, driving, they all fell by the wayside when he was in recovery. And then I had to choose my battles. I decided that he didn't have to be completely independent, that this was going to be a gradual process that would take time, and not everything had to be perfect and ready. So for example, in high school, I used to wake him up because he had a hard time moving in the morning, and his alarm wouldn't always wake him up. When he got to university, he wasn't with me anymore. He would have to wake up on his own. But I would call him sometimes to make sure he was awake, especially when he had an important class, or for sure when he had an exam. I taught him how to do the laundry before I sent him off, which he was oddly good at, but for him, cooking did not work out at all. It was complicated and time-consuming. I remember I tried to cook dinners with him the summer before his second year, since he would no longer be eating in the cafeteria. He was going to be moving into a place with some friends. And the cooking didn't go well. He was frustrated, it was challenging for him. And one option would have been to have him just stay on the meal plan at the university, but then he wouldn't have eaten with his friends. And then he would have to leave every time he wanted to eat something, which wasn't practical or fun. So we bought him a deep freezer. I cooked and froze all his meals, and I still do. And some people think I'm crazy, but those people don't know what it's like to parent a kid with a disability. And all of us parents have to just, I guess, do what we need to do to make things work. I was a nervous mom in the months leading up to his departure. And so getting actual stuff ready helped me stay a little bit calmer. An example of this is that I had to put together a container I put together a container with extra drugstore stuff and all of his medication, a nice plastic box, and that way he could shove it under his bed, and that came in very handy. Okay, that's all I've got here, so I'm going to pass it over to Kate.
Great. I'm just going to go through some of the background concepts. So as your adolescent is developing into a young adult, your role evolves towards being a mentor, a guide, and a cheerleader. This means providing support, comfort, empathy, helping with long-term goal achievement, sharing your perspective, and coaching them through complex problem solving, while giving space to your young adult to make their own decisions and experience the consequences of those decisions. College and university will most likely not be a straight path. It might mean that your son or daughter is changing their major, changing the program they're in, changing the school they're at, taking a year off. And this is totally typical of the post-secondary experience. It is important that you encourage your son or daughter to remain flexible and open to the different changes as they learn, grow, and figure out their own path. This chart here from the Transition Resource Guide highlights some of the differences that you'll find between high school and college and university. In high school, teachers are operating under the Education Act. And this means that teachers can share information about your son or daughter to make sure that they're getting the proper supports in place. And this includes making decisions about accommodations, disclosing to you, the parent, information as long as your son or daughter is under the age of 18. And it means putting together the IEP, which then can be shared amongst teaching staff. When they go to college and university, they're now under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act. This means that the college or university is not allowed to disclose information about them to you unless your son or daughter has given permission. And it means that documentation has to be provided to the school so that they can assess what the appropriate accommodations will be for your son or daughter. I think it was mentioned previously, but your son or daughter can sign permission allowing you to be in touch with accessibility services.
And as you're on this journey, this is kind of the trajectory of where you're headed. So you're probably at the exploring stage now. You're learning all the new language that you need to learn for this transition, all the kind of rules or, things like needing the confidentiality and all of those things that you're going to experience once they are in university. So then they'll be applying for schools. Maybe some of your children have already applied to schools and the programs of their choice. They've done some research and soon they should be getting some acceptances, or maybe, that's the part that you're waiting for in a couple of years, is those acceptances from different universities. So once your son or daughter child has made a choice around where they're going to go to post-secondary, that's the point that if you haven't already looked at that transition resource guide, that's a really good time to look at that resource and look up where the accessibility service is and how to get in touch with them at the post-secondary that they've chosen to go to. We start to see students after the student has accepted their offer. So then that's a great time to connect with accessibility services and find out what the process is for registration. Many of us, of our services, it's an online registration where the student might fill out a registration form and submit documentation that way. And I just want, sometimes there's a misunderstanding that the documentation is going to come to us from the high school, and it doesn't, for those reasons that Kate was talking about earlier, about the difference in the ministries that we fall under and everything, that information, because it is medical information, can't just come to us. So it really does have to be initiated by the student to connect with us and provide us with the information in order to set up their accommodations.
Take a moment now to acknowledge that everybody's experience in high school is different. And for as many students where high school has been a struggle or not something that's brought happiness and joy into their life, there's others who've loved the experience. And students at every step in between those two poles. And so for many, because of the relationship that they've had with high school, positive or negative, this potential transition to college or university is a time of worry or anxiety about maybe leaving behind things that they've loved, or being unsure what's out there at college or university. So it might be helpful to acknowledge that, yes, post-secondary education is that time to obtain an educational credential, a degree, a diploma, but it's also different from high school. And it's different in that there are so many support services, resources, experiences available to students where they can really shape their own experience at college or university, whether it's joining a club, whether it's participating in intramurals or recreation, getting involved in student governance, accessing specialized supports via the accessibility office. Maybe it's tutoring, maybe it's connecting with a peer mentor or leader on campus, and maybe it's diving into some of their interests, whether it's related to their own health and well-being or otherwise. There's just so many opportunities available at college or university for a student to dive into what they're most interested in. And ideally, their course of study has to do with that. But even if not, there's going to be opportunities on campus for them to get involved with and make relationships with people who have similar interests as they do. And so in speaking with your student as they prepare for this transition, this can be a helpful conversation to have and to begin to probe about. What are those opportunities at college or university that they might be able to take advantage of, that they're curious about, that they're interested in, that they think might fill out their time? All of the students in their program are going to leave with the same credential. For those students who have that space and that energy to get involved in these extra experiences, well, these are the things that if they're looking at this as one step on their way to a career, well, these are the things that are going to help them to stand out from their peers. We're going to be moving now into a few sort of transition coaching tips. Angela was just talking about some of the phases of this journey. So we have different tips that might apply to different phases of this journey of transitioning from high school to post-secondary. First, Angela, I think you were going to comment just broadly about what we're talking about when we're talking about coaching in this context.
Yes, thank you, Robert. So to give a bit of context, so this coaching mindset, and I think, Lisa, you did a wonderful job of kind of describing your own role as a coach, of how you set your son up, and then really did, as a coach does, you prepare your player, you prepared your son, and then from the guide, you guided him from the sidelines, right? And looked to see what skills and things he needed, and then helped to develop those so that he was going to be independent and be able to kind of play the game. So it's an important shift for parents. And I can empathize so much with how that is a hard shift. And we heard that in your story as well, Lisa, that, especially when you have a student who has needed support in various ways. And maybe, as you were mentioning, those times when your student might be developing some of these independent skills, that's kind of not the priority at that time, perhaps. And so there's, it might take a little bit longer to get to those independent steps, but it is an important part of the young adult's journey for sure. And student engagement is key. So I think in following their journey and where they want to go, because it will look different for everyone, but if the student is engaged in the process, I think that's really key to their success. Yeah.
Thanks, Angela, very much, and everybody. As we move to the next slide, these are our specific tips now, and I'm just going to introduce each one, and then we also, Lisa or Angela or Robert will also share an experience from their perspective on each one. So coaching tip number one is about helping to organize and chunk information and to-dos. There are so many things to do when exploring and preparing for post-secondary, and feeling overwhelmed is pretty common, as well as anxious and many of the other feelings people noted earlier in the chat. So both on the part of parents and family members, and of course of the students. So parents and family members really can play a huge role in helping to alleviate some of the feeling of panic and overwhelm, and by helping to make a plan and organizing and prioritizing. The prioritizing is something that has been shared, and so it doesn't all have to be done at once. And sometimes student and family can plan for some things to be looked into by one person or another. That can really help to make things more manageable. Robert, can you give us some examples of these kinds of early steps and how people may help?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is certainly one of those tips I think that applies both to you as a parent and also to the students that you're supporting, and breaking down this huge process of transitioning to college or university into chunks. I think during this, say, exploration phase of the journey, some type of assessment or self-assessment that your student could complete around the topic of interests, around strengths, can be a really helpful task in informing some of this decision making. If you're kind of at that precipice, what program, what university, what college or university, like what's right? Uh, Maybe doing some tasks that will help your student to kind of begin to answer these questions a little bit. In the college university pathway accompanying family guide, it's one of the resources that will be shared. There is like a bit of a self-assessment that can be done about college, university, and I believe Lisa in a moment will speak to how she and her son sort of assessed fit. But that self-assessment, looking at that, could be a helpful task. Uh, Absent a formal sort of self-assessment or character strengths assessment, there's a great one that I've done with students, the VIA character strength assessment. It can help the student to get to know what they're best at, and maybe they can step into college or university looking for those experiences that will help them bring their strengths to life, and whether that's field of study or institution can maybe be informed by that. But also maybe a guiding question to ask your student, like, what is your best hope for college or university? What are they truly hoping to get out of this step of the journey? Is it that credential? Is it to develop their academic skills? Or is it about some of the things I was talking about earlier, building their social circle, rounding out their skill set? Maybe they've always wanted to take part in intramurals or athletics or something of this nature. And so working with your student on what do they want the most out of this might be able to guide some of the following steps that you'll undertake. And so, well, Lisa, I'll pass it on to you now.
Thanks, Robert. We're moving on to our second tip then, if you can advance the slides, which is that parents really can also play a big role in enabling the wide variety of ways that there are to explore and experience what educational institution and program might be a good fit. And Robert was really starting to touch on a variety of ways, and as well that great big picture question, what are your best hopes? And Lisa, you do have some other examples of this too, how to explore. So over to you. Thank you, Robert, and on to Lisa.
Yeah, I do have a few things to share, but I did want to say in response to what Robert was saying, one thing that I didn't have to worry about was my son deciding what he wanted to do. He knew very early on, maybe by grade 8, that he wanted to be an engineer. So that part we had settled. It was just how to get him to where he wanted to be. So the first thing I would say is that he made use of the guidance counselor at his high school, and I would strongly recommend this to anyone. They know your child's academic profile. They probably know additional things about them as well. And they know what's out there in terms of schools and programs, and can help your child recognize how their interests can be pursued in post-secondary. So it's a great place to start. The other thing that I would say is very important is to physically visit the campuses that your child is interested in, if this is at all possible. We were able to see all the campuses that my son was interested in, but this was pre-COVID, of course. The visits were really great because in some instances, they weren't at all what he expected. For example, his dream before visiting any school was to go to University of Waterloo. He had talked about it for years. After his first visit, he was disappointed that it wasn't the vibe he was expecting, but he still really wanted to like it. So he actually visited for a total of 3 times before we finally struck before finally striking it from the list. And now that's not to say there's anything at all wrong with University of Waterloo, great school, but it just wasn't for him. All universities in the pre-COVID world do offer tours to students. And also many universities come to Toronto to provide information about their schools, and they give students an opportunity to meet staff and faculty and ask questions. And then there's also the university fair that happens for a weekend at the end of September, where you can speak to representatives from a bunch of different schools, which we found very helpful. Just giving you a tip that if you do go this coming September, I've gone to it twice now with my two older children. Go later in the day when it's less crowded. Usually the same staff and faculty are there all day long. I'll pass it back to Carolyn now.
Thanks, Lisa. Yes, personal note, I can say my niece has been an ambassador for a long time at her school and does the tours, also virtual in COVID times. So important. And I really felt like she got to make a great fit by all the visits that we did. It's such an important element. So in terms of the next tip, number 3, it's the idea of discussing together ahead of post-secondary examples of when and how young people might want their parents' support in post-secondary, whether they're living at home or whether they're living on campus. Really the idea of, through open communication, ensuring that your young person knows that it's totally normal that all students in post-secondary experience ups and downs, things that go great and things that might not have been expected to be challenges, or things that were a little bit expected and are challenges. Being upfront too that there may be some unique challenges as a student with a disability. For example, sometimes accommodations that are set up in advance and seem like a great fit are work well in some classes and are a challenge in others. And so there can be things that do need a little bit of perseverance or resilience to work through. And talking in advance about the types of resources that can help can be great, but just as a main point, making sure that your young person knows that it's okay to reach out for support, in particular, again, to parents, even if it's something that a parent has stopped being such an active supporter on, but then wants to re-engage. It's not a failure to need to talk to somebody. It's something we do throughout our lives. I still talk with parents and other family members today about challenges. So it's really just something that we do want to encourage to feel comfortable. Can you share some examples about this, Angela, from your experience?
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So one example is, it's a great idea if you can kind of list out the different types of tasks that might be needed, around like course selection and buying your books. And if you're applying for OSAP or all these different tasks that are needed when a student is transitioning to post-secondary. And then having a conversation about, like, do you think you'll need my support with this one? Do you want to try it on your own first? Do you want me to help? Or what information do you need from me in order to move forward with that? And we actually, with one of our transition programs, we suggest even making a plan for that gradual fade of the parent. So, okay, this year, I'm going to really help you with getting your books. We're going to walk through all the steps together so that next year you can try it on your own and then come to me for help if you need to. And so it's kind of scaffolding that support as time goes on, as the student becomes more independent. And I think also, sometimes we do hear that students, they're not sure if they want to access accessibility services, and they're not sure what the benefit is to accessing it beyond accommodations. And I would really encourage your student to know that that's another place to go for help. So we might not only support with disability related things, but if they're coming and saying, I don't know if I should drop this course, or, should I be taking this course? Well, we can help navigate that. So we're actually a great resource. We know the supports and services on the campus. And so we can be that resource if it's not even specifically disability related, but, you'll want to go talk to academic advising about that, or you're struggling with time management. Oh, there's learning skills services, or there's the writing center that can help you put together your papers. And also you as parents doing these types of workshops and learning about those services, right? perhaps you didn't go to post-secondary and you're not aware of what's available on campus or what they might be called nowadays. I know for myself, even the names of all the different services and supports have changed. So just having that language, so when your child does come to you maybe and says, I'm not doing so well in this course, you can plant those little seeds of, oh, remember we went to that presentation and we heard about this support on campus, maybe check that out. And then they can go off and check it out. So those are some of my tips.
Thanks, Angela. That's great. If we move on to transition tip number 4, the idea of supporting your teen or young adult to get the necessary information, but actually make actual connections as well too. So this is ideally sort of a meeting or a specific plan to be at an information session. For example, if it's like an information fair about opportunities on campus for getting involved in campus life. Ideally not just sort of a list of resources, because they would be I guess it's human nature, but also many young people just feel a little shy or hesitant in terms of taking these first steps. So that actual like person-to-person connection can be incredibly helpful. So I'm going to pass it over to Lisa to share a little bit about what she and her son and family did in this regard.
Yeah, so there are a few important things that we did in planning for my son's success at school. First of all, we decided that we needed to get up-to-date testing for him. We made sure that we had this done when he was in grade 12, so that all of his required accommodations were as up-to-date as possible. Just a tip that if you're connected with Holland Bloorview or Sick Kids, they'll test your child before they turn 18, and it's a free service. I think this might have been previously mentioned that after that you would have to deal with the adult system. So the psychometrist who completed my son's testing at Sick Kids advised us that given our son's condition, it would be better to get as many accommodations that he was eligible for and that the university was able to offer. So she didn't sugarcoat his scores. Strengths were not necessary to highlight like they might have been in high school, because the goal was to maximize his potential and try to get him closer to the same playing field as everyone else. The idea was to have him go to school with as many tools as possible. You don't know how your child will react with the pressures and expectations of college or university. So it's best to go in with a profile and a plan that's as comprehensive and as detailed as possible. Even if you or your child don't think they need it or don't think they need certain things, they may. My son used some of the accommodations he didn't think he was going to use, and then others he thought he was going to need, he didn't use. And then in the end, after he had arrived at university, he had to adjust his accommodations once he realized what worked best for him. I'll just give you a few examples of accommodations that they offered to my son. They have this thing where someone else who's in the class, another student in the class, can share notes so that he didn't have to take notes in class and instead can just listen and focus. And students will volunteer to do this. He was offered extra time on exams and assignments, no more than one exam in a day, exams only during certain times of days, writing exams in a quiet room, etc. And we were even asked if there was certain things that that would be helpful that they hadn't offered to us. I just wanted to share with you as well that they do have an option at Queen's, which I'm sure must exist at other Ontario universities, that they will delay an exam or an assignment with 24 hours notice, no questions asked. I'm not sure about the policy at other schools, but it is like this at Queen's for every student, regardless of whether or not you have a disability. So it's kind of nice to know that, because every once in a while students do get into a jam, and it does kind of give them some leeway. Now, in terms of accessibility, we looked into accessibility services at all the schools my son was interested in, and you can do this at any level of exploration. We did it when visiting some of the schools, and then again when he was admitted. And when he accepted his offer, we made an appointment with an advisor in the Accessibility Center. We visited in the summer before school began. And we brought all of the documentation so that it was all ready to go. At the school that he chose, both physical accommodations and academic accommodations were necessary for him, and these were unfortunately not connected at his school. So he was going into residence, and we needed to deal with a different department and complete a different set of forms to get him set up in residence. He needed a lower floor, and he needed to be close to his classes, so he needed a specific room. That was a completely different system we had to deal with. In terms of additional supports, we connected him with everything we could. We made sure he knew how to reach out to the mental health center on campus, just in case. We connected him with the Learning Strategies Center that exists and is actually part of the fees for every student. And I think Angela was mentioning that the supports that exist are things like helping with essay writing and editing. So he was a pretty good student, and he didn't think he would need it. And we reminded him that everyone is a good student when they go into post-secondary and college, and that these supports exist for all students. Now, in terms of connections, in high school, we had lots of people watching our son, and it's not the same when they reach university. So we made sure he connected to an advisor in his program, the Dawn on his floor in residence, and we also knew some students in upper years at the university. So we asked if they would be willing to mentor him, and of course, they were happy to do this. Most students are so proud of their school, they want to take on a leadership role like this. The last thing that I'll just suggest to you is, in making all of these connections, we had a discussion with him about what he wanted people to know about his disability, if anything. I'll pass it back to Carolyn now.
Thanks, Lisa. You touched on so many things, and I saw some questions popping up as you were going in the chat, and among others, we'll clarify about the psychoeducational testing, and there's so much there, great ideas about the connections on campus. Thank you very much for that. We had one final tip, which is about support for you, the parent or caregiver. And Lisa, can you just briefly share your advice on that? We sort of have a minute or two before we wanted to get to the Q&A, so it's such an important topic though.
Yes.
Back to you, Lisa.
I just wanted to let all the parents know that when I was planning to get my son into post-secondary, I secretly wanted to keep him home and not send him anywhere so that I could protect him. He'd already suffered so much in his life. But if you feel this way, like I did, try to keep it a secret. I had to keep reminding myself that I knew in my heart that he needed to do this. And so outwardly, I had to show him that I believed in him and that he was completely capable of doing this. If your child goes away, or even if they stay home and they're at school for the day and you receive a panic text, it's easy to go down the rabbit hole. I found that I was always wanting to fix things for my son right away, and I had to stop myself, knowing that he needed to do it himself most of the time. But I should tell you that if things are derailing, as they did for my son, every so often, I did step in. I'm just going to skip a couple of things that I was going to say here because I know that we're short on time. But I do want you to know that when I have been worried, and I still do get worried about my son, I always talk to someone, another family member, a friend. Once when I was super worried, I did call the university and I was able to get an advisor on the phone, and she was great. Now, they don't really want to talk to you. So here's what I did. I prefaced it by saying, hey, I know you can't really talk about students, so I understand if you can't do anything about this, but I'm worried and this is why, and do you have any advice? And she was very helpful and she helped me make a plan. Parenting a kid as they transition from high school to university or college when they have a new or existing condition is really tough. And I learned that you can't be like your friends sending their kids off who don't have these types of challenges. You're different. You're going to worry way more. In some cases, you'll need to keep tabs on them in the way that other parents don't have to do. But in other ways, they're like regular students, which means you have to let them make mistakes and then fix them. So of course, I'm still his mom, but I'm a mom of an adult student now. there's lots of scary things about sending your child away or sending them to college, even if they are, or university, even if they are staying at home. But as Robert mentioned earlier, there's a lot of great things about it. There were so many challenges for my son in high school. And the nice thing about going on to post-secondary is that it offers him a fresh start. It was his time to do whatever he wanted, choosing a school to a program, to what friends he was going to have, clubs, courses, activities. There's just piles of opportunity. And while it was really scary, it's been really rewarding for me to watch him learn and develop into a competent young adult.
Being watchful of the time and all of our guests and presenters' time and everyone's on the webinar tonight. It is 8, so we did want to conclude more or less on time. And so we thank everybody very much for the interest in this topic, and to all of our presenters, Lisa and Robert and Angela and Kate, thank you. And thank you, Karen, for joining. So again, thank you so much to all the presenters, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining tonight. We really appreciate having the chance to talk. Such an important time of life, and these tips were great.